Fantastic. Okay, so we'll get started. So just a quick introduction before we get into the conversation, in case some of you don't know us, we put up a slide here which gives you a quick overview of what we do, so you know who we are and where we are if you need us at any time. And our mission is to create environments where people and teams thrive. And our services are split between HR support, resolving conflict, and improving workplaces through organisation design, training, and culture reviews. So our contact email is on the slide if you'd like to contact us after the webinar. So I wanted to properly introduce you, Matt, and Change Mental Health as an organisation. So our Joanna met you at the Gathering conference where you were running a session, and she was so taken by that session that we thought we'd like to invite you along to be a guest speaker at one of our webinars. So you're the Partnership and Development Manager at Change Mental Health. And Change Mental Health's mission is to create a future where no one needs to face mental health illness alone. And you represent an organisation with over 50 years experience, which is just fantastic, delivering person-centred, non-clinical mental health support across Scotland. And the organisation, you are a specialist in workplace mental health, culture and leadership. And you help organisations to prevent the issues earlier and build healthier, more sustainable working environments. So you are also a national mental health and suicide prevention advocate. And we've put on the screen there what we were talking about with you as we got to know you is that you completed a 398-mile solo walk across Scotland just a year ago, in nicer weather than this, I believe, and that was to raise awareness and funds. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that as well.
Sure.
So we hear a lot about mental health, and sometimes it's so often it can become lost in the noise of news and all the things that we have to do day to day. And of course, not all mental health concerns are caused by work, but they can still impact on work. So most people have heard the statistics and facts, but we want to highlight a few points to focus our minds and discussions relating it to the importance in the workplace before we go into the conversation. So we put on the screen that it isn't a nice to have, it's foundational to engagement, performance, and keeping good people as well. And mental health concerns are a leading cause of work-related illness in Scotland, with stress, anxiety, and depression accounting for over half of all work-related ill health cases each year, which is huge. And around 1 in 6 working age adults in Scotland experience a mental health concern, and that directly impacts their engagement, their performance, and their long-term participation in work as well. So it's a significant issue. And work-related stress and poor mental health contributes to millions of working days lost annually across Scotland. And that then has the knock-on impact, not just to the organisation, but individuals in the team as well. I mentioned presenteeism on the slide as well, which is a significant issue. And so creating safe, open workplaces is shifting mental health support from a crisis response to early intervention. And that's definitely something we're going to focus on today. And if you don't address mental health proactively, then organisations end up paying for it one way or another. And it can often be at a higher cost through lost working days and hidden costs of poor workplace health. So that seems a little bit doom and gloom. However, we'll get into the conversation, and what we're going to cover with you today, Matt, is, it looks very small on here, 4 points, but mental health as a journey, not just a quick fix. So not having it as a one size fits all approach or a tick box exercise. understanding people's changing needs over time, and the role of the managers versus the processes of the organisation as well. And then thinking about individual experience as well, so that it's tailored support. What I really found interesting in our conversations to prepare for this was the generational perspective piece and the stigma that can come along with that. So we'll have a chat through age differences and practical actions for employers. So we always want to have some takeaways for the audience. So anything practical to help create that psychologically safe environment, role modeling, communication around mental health concerns as well. So we hope today's discussion gives you all practical ideas and inspiration that you can take back to your own organisation. So get on to the conversation. I'll take the slides off so that it's just focusing on us. So I'll stop the share. Excellent. So welcome, Matt.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the introduction, and hopefully I can live up to Johnny and Sarah's presentation at the gathering that you came and witnessed. So they did a fantastic job that day.
Excellent. Okay, so mental health support. So we mentioned it's not a quick fix. And I laid out those statistics as well, and all the kind of real cost. What, in your opinion, then, is the real cost to a business of not taking mental health seriously?
It's a multifaceted answer, but luckily Gallup released some figures very recently in the last two or 3 weeks, and they looked at the global cost being 10 trillion a year, or 9% of the global GDP. So that's a
Wow.
financial number. That's a huge number across the world, money that we will probably never individually see ourselves unless anyone in the room here is a trillionaire. If so, please do get in contact with Change Mental Health. We would love to talk to you, but I think that 10 trillion dollar figure, it's a really interesting one because it doesn't quite look at the human impact of mental health at the workplace, and the figure itself it doesn't cover things like safety and incidents, doesn't take into account turnover or say healthcare costs across the country. So it's a huge figure, but most of these things they will show up long before somebody is sick, mentally unwell in the workplace. Most organizations tend to react once things do begin to show, but ultimately, most of the time, when we're talking about mental health in the workplace and directly from the workplace, it's lots of small moments over time. People feeling when they stop feeling safe, when they stop feeling valued, when they stop feeling energized. And our goal with Change Mental Health is to help. Well, we have many goals at Change Mental Health, but directly at the workplace side of things, looking at the workplace as a preventative space across Scotland. If we're spending more time at work than we are effectively anywhere else with our family, our kids at the gym, out in nature, if we're spending more time at work than we are anywhere else, then the effect that work has on us is a significant factor. And if we can help to improve that environment in the workplace, then ultimately we will be helping to improve the mental health across the country, and ultimately people, needing the services that we provide from the very bottom to the top of Scotland. But if it's helpful, it's really tough to talk about the human side of, the costs of not taking mental health seriously. So if you're okay with it, I would love to give you a little personal story.
Yes, absolutely. Make it feel real for us.
Yeah. So there was a period of time in my life, and if you really want to find out when that was, I'm sure you can look at my LinkedIn and sort of find out. But I was working uh, two jobs in the same role for two separate organizations at the same time. Same person, same role, um, different organization. Same me, same skill sets, same attitude, same everything. And it was really interesting. It's quite funny, me doing this and having that experience because it's a rare experience doing the same job across two different organizations. But for one, I was productive, and I was happy, and I was doing pretty well. I hope. And the other, I was coasting and miserable, and I wasn't delivering. But throughout the week, I was the same person. But Monday through Wednesday, I was one form of myself, and Thursday, Friday, I was a different form of myself. And that environment that I was walking into ultimately was the only different factor in there. Obviously, there are lots of different things we can pick out. We probably don't have time in terms of what exactly was going wrong in that workplace, but um, that environment was not only impacting my performance, my ways of showing up at work each day, but it was impacting me outside of work as well. I stopped taking care of myself as well on those days. I wasn't as attentive to, my own health, my, you know, lots of things were sort of happening by my sort of disengagement from that workplace. And it's not just an effect to that person. There's so many different things that are going here, and I think it's quite fascinating with now looking at the work we do with Change Mental Health. Um, because mental health ultimately will affect how we show up at work. It affects performance. It affects things like our safety as well. We do a bit of work with renewable energy projects across Scotland. We're delivering training. We're helping with the mental health across these sites across Scotland, and the people we're in contact with in those organisations isn't HR. It's the health and safety officers, because there is a very direct impact between the mental health and the well-being of their people and their ability to show up. And if they're using machinery or in dangerous environments, if they're not their best self, their mental health at work is being impacted, then um, there is that risk of these people at work not only to injure themselves, but to delay the project. When we're talking multi-billion pound energy projects across Scotland, one big delay due to mental health would be a huge cost for them. So I think I'm going on a little bit of a tangent here, but I think it is just such a impactful thing, and often it's hard to put a number on it. Gallup did, but my colleague Sarah, I was just on a training with her, and I think she uses a phrase that data tells a story, but it may not tell your story. And I think in organizations, we can look at $10 trillion in terms of mental health impact across the globe, but in terms of everyone else's individual business, or even Scotland as a whole, there is a huge impact here. It's just sometimes by the time we notice, it's potentially a little bit too late. So hope that answered the question. But feel free to jump wherever you would like.
Thanks for being so open, Matt. And that's so interesting to have a direct comparison, that's so unusual. Um, so yeah, you've covered the real cost, and what I'm picking up from there as well is the ripple effect. So yes, it had an impact on you as an individual, but it then ripples out. So as your colleague was saying, it's the data is one part of it, then there's the story, and then there's the knock-on effect as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very much so.
Okay. Um, so why do one-off initiatives like awareness days or training often fall short when it comes to organizations trying to do something? Because that's what we tend to see, isn't it? Is these initiatives.
Yes. Being careful with how I mention this. I think a one-off initiative is still better than no initiative. I think that's a good place to start. But there are limitations to one-off initiatives within the workplace. Awareness without behavior, I think it tends to frustrate workers. It becomes almost like a like a comms or a PR exercise rather than it does something about mental health and the well-being of your people. So if you are out there and you're promoting work-life balance, but then you expect an email reply at 8 or 9 p.m., but are you really walking the walk, or are you just, putting out a sort of comms exercising? We care about our people. And I think employees are quite smart. They can tell the difference between, culture and a campaign. Um, and this applies to things like, one-off things like benefits and gym memberships and meditation apps and all these things as well. There was a really interesting study, I believe it was 2024 now, and it looked at one-off mental health interventions across the workplace, yoga sessions, meditation apps, all the things we see across most workplaces in Scotland, and it basically came to the conclusion that all of these things are effectively useless if there isn't that workplace intervention as well. All of these businesses are throwing money down the drain if they're offering these one-off perks, but they're not actually changing the culture and the environment that people are in each and every day. So, a one-off workshop or a yoga class, it's not going to change a toxic manager or impossible workload or, poor communication during change. And I think most organizations tend to care. They don't fail because they don't care. They likely just don't really know where to start, or they treat well-being as an event, which feels a little ironic with us being in Mental Health Awareness Week. But they treat it more as an event rather than, a way of how the business operates. We look at training, change mental health as, the doorway, but we prefer to work in partnership, work with an organization over time, so that we can really see the impact and sort of keep revisiting and keep seeing that progress and keep sort of mental health at the forefront of how organizations sort of approach their, I guess, day-to-day living in the workplace. Like there is, like I mentioned, that operational risk when mental health is not at the forefront, and we would prefer to work with people long term. Although one-off initiatives, like I say, are better than no initiatives. So we, yeah, I think a lot of people are trying to do their best, but it is tough, and it would be silly for me to sit back and say, it's not tough out there right now. The economy's, in an interesting place, and the world's always changing, and you never know what the news will say, the next day. And I think it's just important to note that mental health, will be at the forefront of the business, whether you see it or not, unless your company is fully run by AI chatbots. Your business will be run by people, and if those people are not at their best, it will be affecting the business. And mental health plays a huge part in that.
Yeah. And isn't it interesting that, you're saying initiatives are good, but actually it's the bit that doesn't cost that has the impact then. So the role modeling, and you mentioned culture as well. So I think sometimes budget comes up, about having a well-being budget and what's the cost for these different interventions. But actually, it's the part that doesn't cost anything that's going to make a huge impact then.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
but
well-being
it,
budget, sorry to jump in, is an interesting one. And obviously something we've seen a lot. And I know a lot of people in HR struggle a little bit with wanting to help and not quite having the budget to help. They're seen as a nice to have, the well-being or the mental health of people, something nice. So they get like a small well-being budget every now and then. But for us, I mentioned the phrase operational risk earlier on. Like, I think organizations who take this seriously, they recognize that, there is that safety risk, or there is that comms risk, or there's various different things impacting that well-being and mental health will impact. And I think we can use those budgets on top of the well-being budgets as well. It's a really effective way to bridge that gap and turn it into more of a boardroom conversation rather than, just a nice to have and the well-being, you know, in the corner over there do an event once a year. It's definitely something we're facing. That's how I like to approach it anyway.
That's a really useful takeaway from anyone in the audience who is responsible for well-being then, how to build your budget or extend your budget. Okay, so thinking about the initiative side, if people are having initiatives, what actions can a business take to avoid them being seen as a tick box approach? So if you want to summarize that, we've alluded to that already.
Yeah. There's a few different things. I won't touch too much on what we've already talked about. I think there's a very big obvious answer to this question. I think that's leadership role modeling. I think there's so much data just around the impact of good leadership in the workplace, and especially around conversations around mental health. It's I don't have the exact figures near me, but the effect of a senior leadership person talking about their mental health will impact not only other people talking about it, but feeling safe to talk about it, but then also will influence the uptake of people using things like EAPs or the meditation apps, which I mentioned earlier, or all of the other well-being initiatives. Like when you give people that psychological safety by that leadership sort of talking about it, you open up the rest of the organization to um, feeling the ability that they can talk about it. So authenticity, I think it's super important. Vulnerability, but I think also rather than sort of thinking about what initiative should we run, start asking what's making work feel hard, and how can we change that. Um, yeah, I think when people feel supported and seen, and that they're speaking to a human, and that their worries, their struggles, their opinions matter, it really helps. And all of the data, everything backs this up. And I think the impact of a manager and the leader within organizations is huge when it comes to not only performance but well-being.
Yeah. And there's a lot a lot of talk about kind leadership these days as well. And within HR, sometimes it's difficult for us to recognize that actually not everybody's comfortable speaking about their feelings. We're so used to it in HR, it kind of
Mm.
comes naturally. But we mentioned at the start about generational differences, and that's only one side of things. There can be the female male difference as well. It's just individual, isn't it? That different
Yeah.
people feel different ways about opening up and their ability to speak about where they are at personally. So, thinking about that, then, Matt, what language or approaches can help people open up in the workplace about mental health, especially across different age groups? Because I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I also find it quite fascinating.
Oh, your
Just
sound's
to,
gone a little bit there.
is that any better?
That's better.
Perfect. I'll stay leaned forward. Um, gonna Before I answer that, I'm gonna just say that I'm probably gonna make some sweeping statements in this answer, because if we're talking about generations and age groups, it's not something you can throw a blanket over and say
Mm.
millennials are all going to do this and boomers are all going to do this. It's not that simple, but there are trends, there are different things that have popped up in studies and data that it paints a picture, but it doesn't paint the full picture. And I think there's um there's a really nice quote that I like from Simon Sinek, and it's just like all employees are people, all customers are people, all shareholders are people. If you don't understand people, you don't understand business. So I think understanding people and having that manager who knows those differences in conversations that you just mentioned, how to speak to different people in different ways is important. But when it comes to generations, different age groups in the workplace, it gets even more complicated. I think, especially with COVID happening, and I think there was almost a hard, I don't want to say reset, but a hard change in the workplace where, a lot of people may have taken redundancy, retired, and then you have this influx of young people come into the organization, and suddenly you've got this clash of styles in terms of how people want to work and how people want to be managed and how people want to succeed. So I think first way to be is just not to assume all generations think the same way, and don't assume they're motivated by the same things either. Like, so this is where the sweeping statements will come in. Those older generations, typically they would have that family focus. Their focus would be providing for the family. They would have that work-life balance. I always find the phrase work-life balance quite interesting because it'd be work dash life. It's almost like they're two separate things. There's got to be that separation between work and life. And I think for those older generations in the workplace, there very much was that. They would come in, they would make their money, they would get the benefits, they would provide, and then on the weekends, like that was a completely different life. Their core pressures would come around stress and fatigue and financial worry and burnout because they were working too much. That's the language that resonates with that generation. Again, sweeping statement. But with the younger generations, I don't think work-life balance is the right phrase. I'm not sure what is, but work is a part of life. It very much is, part of their identity, part of their sort of way of being. And I think their focus isn't so much on that family aspect. For some, obviously it will be, but their focus more is on building a meaningful life. The conversation, lands around purpose and belonging, autonomy, and identity. Um, Daniel Pink's work is super useful there, but I think the world's changed. I think COVID and financial crashes and war and all of these things that have happened over the last, 20 years, I've seen a lot of priority shifting, and I think the language we use with it has to change too. Um, as one example, under 35s, they're the highest risk of daily loneliness at 23%. That's both in and outside the workplace. That's not a generation being fragile. That's a generation in roles and patterns of work that create structural loneliness. Belonging isn't a soft issue for these young workers, it's a core one. And if you're not addressing that, then you're going to have issues when it comes to your mental health or performance or engagement. All of these things can be impacted. And then, if we want to throw in, home working against the office working and all that conversation plays a role in loneliness. So I think, that's just one example. But purpose, identity, there's stronger entry points sometimes when it comes to language around mental health. Going in and saying, "Are you depressed?" sometimes may not be the best language to some people. It's like, "Are you feeling a sense of purpose today?" Or "Are you feeling like you're being productive?" That's a really easy way to start that conversation. And when it comes to the conversations with people, storytelling often beats corporate messaging. So that leadership conversation, the storytelling, the just human conversations, they beat policy documents every day of the week. So most people I don't think need the perfect well-being strategy. They just need the permission to feel human. And sadly, what feeling human means will be very different for every single person on this planet. So that's the challenge we all face.
Yeah, it's so interesting, man. It's coming back to being curious, isn't it? Spending time with different generations from ourselves as well to make sure we're getting to know them and not making those assumptions. So yeah, be curious, be confident to be curious, to find out what it's really like for different generations.
Yeah, yeah. It's a tough one. Like everyone will be different. I think that's where managers become the key clog or the key cog, sorry, in this whole conversation. They are that bridge between the organizational goals and the people who are there to produce them. So when they can get it right, they are the key structure here in making sure the work gets done, but also that people are happy at the end of the day. And we can't make a perfect world in terms of, if people are happy at work, it may not mean they're happy overall in life, but as people who are in HR or running businesses, the only thing we can control is the environment we provide for people each and every day, and we can do our best around that. And hopefully, the results from that will be positive outcomes for people across your workplace. So, yeah,
Yeah. Do you know, most of our webinars, the regular check-in from a manager, that comes up as something that is so important, regardless of what the topic is. And I think it's really relevant again here, isn't it? It's those everyday check-ins just to get a sense of how someone is doing, and just trying to be curious and picking up information without making it a big deal. It's just a
yeah,
regular check-in.
like that was like with the example I made of the two organizations that I worked with. One, I found it almost impossible to reach my manager. Um,
Right.
they, yeah, they were just absent. They basically gave me a phone, a laptop, said, "Go make us some money." Whereas the other manager, if I sent them a message, be like, "Hey, have you got five minutes? I've got this idea. What do you think?" I'll be like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, let's chat." You know, it's helping you with your work, but it's also helping you feel seen, and it's helping you sort of feel like you belong and your work means something. Whereas when you're sort of pushed aside, being like, "You go do it," it it impacts you not just from a workplace point of view. There could be an idea loss, there could be a client loss, there could be um, something that impacts your KPIs or whatever. But as a person, you just don't feel valued. I think that's such a big impact here because you will take that home. How many people will
Mm.
get a glass of wine or a beer after work because they need to de-stress or they just need to, um, yeah, just have something that feels nice after a long day. It's habits like these, which they're fine every now and then, but if they compound into a bottle instead of a glass, and not one night but 5 nights a week, this is where we see struggles, and obviously there's a connection between alcohol and depression and things like that. But not sure if we have time to go down that rabbit hole
Yeah.
today. But yeah, I think just feeling seen and valued is such a important thing. So I'm glad you touched on that.
Yeah, and especially nowadays with hybrid working, remote workers, it's even more important, isn't it? Yeah.
And
Okay.
sadly harder. So
Yeah. But we like a challenge, yeah.
exactly.
So I'm just keeping an eye on the time, Max. I've got some more questions for you. And we've talked a bit about individual experiences then. So, where do you see organizations getting the balance wrong between manager responsibility, which we've talked about, and organizational systems?
Yeah, it's a tough one to answer because every organization will be different. Um, so I think managers for most people will be the emotional experience at work. What it feels like to work somewhere in large part will be determined by your experience with your line manager. Um, but most line managers, like I mentioned before, they're caught in the middle. They're being asked to keep their people happy, but also to hit those organizational objectives. And often it isn't clear where those two things meet or if they even do. Um, but like I touched on before, like for me, they always are connected, even if they don't appear that way. The state of your people is the state of your performance, and that organizational risk I mentioned earlier that keeps coming back around. And sadly, a lot of managers are working inside systems that they potentially didn't create themselves. They inherit the workload, the structure, the pace of change, the communication patterns. But then they're held responsible for the human consequences of their actions, or even maybe they never had training around, how to be a manager. They were good at what they did. Um, they were, let's use the example in tech, they were a great programmer. So they then get promoted, but their skill was coding and understanding, the language around code. It wasn't the language around people. So, they've inherited that manager role without understanding, you know, where they can best make that impact. So I think a lot of organizations they'll see I'll be on a spectrum of, treating a manager as the whole solution. They'll invest in manager training and they'll stop there without touching on, workload or communication or leadership behavior. The manager becomes the well-being strategy. Or some organizations will go the other way and they'll focus on policies and EAPs and posters and frameworks and benefits, all the structural pieces, but then no investment in the people actually having those conversations and those interactions on the ground. For us, mental health and work lives in the gap between the two, and the manager is the bridge. So I think a trained manager inside a broken system will still burn out, but a manager inside a system that works can be the biggest supporting factor in any organization out
Okay, so we need both basically, and we need change
there.
mental health in the middle to glue it together.
I hope so. Yes.
Excellent. Okay, well, want to spend some time thinking about practical actions as well. So, what is one simple change that can immediately improve the approach to mental health support at work?
There are many things here, but if we're just going to choose one, I think improving the quality of our conversations every week. It's been a theme throughout this talk. So, like over and over, we've talked about conversations, and for me, knowledge is power. The more you talk, the more you have those conversations, the more you'll understand, and the more you know how you can help or get the best out of people, or signpost them towards mental health support if they do need it. You know, um, most employees, what they need, unless they are going through crisis, what they need is clarity and consistency and empathy, honesty, that permission to speak openly. Um, that will come through these conversations, the regular human check-ins, you know, asking people questions like what support would generally help right now. It's it sounds like such a basic thing, just go out and chat with your people, but I think it's how you approach that and the knowledge and the awareness you have around that, especially when it comes to the mental health. How you frame these conversations, how you start these conversations. It's something we've been working on a lot, training around supportive conversations. Um, how to open that line of contact. But these conversations they shouldn't just happen when somebody is already drowning. That's kind of the shift that we would like to see from mental health at work being a rescue mission and becoming more like a relationship.
Yeah, the proactive piece then.
Yes,
Yeah.
very much so.
And it's interesting because as you're talking there, I was thinking training. And sometimes there's that thought that training is seen as a sticky plaster or the easy answer. But actually, we've talked before in some other webinars about managers needing to have the confidence to be able to have those conversations, but then knowing where to start. And I do think that training is really useful, particularly for that side of things. Might not be 100% necessary for everybody, but what's your view then? I mean, obviously you deliver training in this topic. You
Yeah,
think it is a necessary?
I believe so. Yeah. Like I sort of touched on earlier, we prefer to, where we can, work with someone on, a recurring basis. That I think helps with training becoming more than just that one-off initiative we mentioned earlier. It does give that confidence and it keeps it on the agenda. So, if the training, I guess, opens that door, it gives people the permission to start thinking about it a little bit further. If they encounter a situation, um, nothing's coming to my head under the pressure, but say they encounter something at work and, they're like, oh, like I learned about that, you know, or maybe they react, maybe they don't react, maybe they're unsure what they should do. Maybe the next time we run training with them, it comes up in conversation, or it's something we can role play on, something we can be like, all right, how would everyone else have acted in this situation? What do you think was the best action? It keeps it there. And I think having that training, have that confidence to talk around things like mental health, and then just keeping it present on the agenda, it gives that confidence. It gives that little knowledge, and you know, at least my point of view, especially with things like Scottish mental health first aid, really great skills to have, but they're skills that I hope no one ever needs to use. They're things that people use when there is a huge crisis, but in that crisis, they are invaluable. But it's, having that confidence to actually approach that situation when it does arrive. So the training will help with that awareness, that confidence piece. And then when it's needed, it will be there. I think when we're talking more sort of base level workplace things, just keeping it there on the agenda um, very much helps the training sort of embed into the culture rather than just becoming that one-off initiative. So yeah.
Yeah. That sounds really interesting. And I think a lot of managers will have seen the signs. So, if somebody ends up going off on sick absence, they're not surprised, but, they might kick themselves that maybe there was something they could have done about it before, but they
Yeah.
just didn't have the tools or the confidence to start that conversation.
Yeah. Or the language, just,
Yeah.
what words should I use? It can come down to that. And it's an uncomfortable thing. It's no getting around that. When we talk about these topics, it is hard, but hopefully we can give that confidence and that knowledge for people to feel more confident in having these conversations more often, because sometimes just starting the conversation is super impactful in itself. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the well-being budget. If you're an organization with a limited budget, what are the first three things that you should prioritize?
First three things. First off, I don't think you need a huge this may get me in trouble with Johnny. Um, you don't need a massive budget to build a healthier culture. Training's great and does build that confidence and awareness. But I think some places to potentially start, better equipped managers. They will shape the day-to-day interactions within the
Oh, your
workplace.
sound's gone again there, Matt.
Is that any better?
Yes, I think it was just a
Cool.
temporary blip.
Okay. Um, Better equipped managers. They will shape the day-to-day culture more than posters or perks ever will. Invest in training, in supportive conversations, in confidence, handling these difficult situations. This is where small budgets, I believe, will pay back the most. I think clarity, communication, again, it comes to training and experience. Uncertainty will often destroy well-being. Um, and this one's free. I think consistency over flashy initiatives is always a good place to start. Regular check-ins, reasonable workloads, flexible thinking, leaders actually modeling the behavior that they ask of their people. These sustainable habits, they will beat occasional campaigns every time. But obviously, if you want to dive a little bit deeper, we are there to help change mental health.
That's brilliant. There's so much in that, Matt. And so we will be doing our key takeaways because there's lots of things buzzing about my head that you've said. So that'll go out after the webinar. But I'm going to do a quick check-in with Louise to see. Actually, hold that thought, Louise, because I'm going to share my slides again, do the technical bit. One. Okay, because that's all my questions for you, Matt. So I'm hoping we've got some from the audience. But before we do that, if we can just take a moment, we've put a QR code on the screen and we really love getting feedback for our speakers and also for ourselves about topics to cover. But this has been such an important topic as well. So giving the audience a moment just now, if you can use the QR code there. I think Louise might also be putting in the chat the link for the form if that works better for you, because it's great to get some feedback. And I haven't had a chance to look at the chat, but I can see there's quite a number of things in it. So hopefully we've got some good questions here.
Yeah, thanks, Rona. We had a few things, a few questions in the chat as we've gone along. I think some of them might have been answered as we've gone, but I'll go back through what we have. So the first thing we had was, excuse me, how can organisations find a balance between trying to support the mental health and well-being of their teams without feeling they need to compromise on high expectations or performance and accountability?
Cool. How much time have we got?
A nice easy one for you, Matt, to start off with. Thanks so much.
I am conscious of the time we have left, and I've seen a few questions
9
there,
minutes,
so
Matt.
I won't dive too deep. But I think I would reframe that question. You know, balance is tough. The world is messy. You know, you've just got to do your best with what you have. But I would reframe that in terms of looking at both as interconnected. You know, the health and the well-being of the teams, you know, it will impact that performance and that accountability. But to have the ability to notice where you can help your team be their best, but to also notice where you do need to step in and help them where you can. I think that general awareness is huge. But I think first acknowledging that, you know, if you're not getting people to show up as their best, whether that's best person, their best selves, or their best employee, then you already will be compromising on those high expectations, the performance and the accountability. So I think when you have engaged, happy people, you know, that accountability will be there, the performance will be there, and the high expectations will likely come along with it. So I didn't give a single tip, but I think just that reframe on how we approach that question, I think will bring more results than, you know, one single tip that may or may not work for a single organization.
Thank you. Again, conscious of time, but I've got a kind of two questions that had come in beforehand that I'm hoping are quick ones. And the first was, how do you make sure that as a manager or a leader, that you're approachable to someone who is struggling with their mental health?
It's a tough question because I think everyone will have a different approach to this. You know, I'm personally I'm more of a listener than I am a talker. I think my personality and the way I would approach this conversation would be different from someone who is more outgoing and more bubbly. So I think just having that psychological safety and building those, I guess, the frameworks and foundations of people feeling safe to have that conversation will be more important than, you know, what opening line you use or how you start the conversation. You know, it's not about being perfect in the language you use. It's just about turning up as a human in that moment and, you know, giving that person the space they need to start that conversation. I think that's the most important bit. How you do it. You know, I've approached it in ways I look back on now and I'm like, well, I did a really poor job there, but at least it gave that person, you know, the ability to open up at that point, and you know, then maybe you can laugh about it at another day. But just having those foundations in place to feel safe to start that conversation is more important than how you logistically approach it in that moment.
Okay, thank you. Now, there's two questions that sort of come in one after another there, but I think they're along the same vein of I suppose it's asking your opinion on the balance between the sort of individual responsibility, for managing and having, a kind of say in their own mental health, and where does that fall to sort of the organisation, what we're expected to do to meet them. So I'd say a couple of questions there along that line. So where would you say the balance is?
Sorry, would you say that again for me?
Mhm. So it's questions around where do you feel the line falls in terms of the balance for the individual having responsibility in their mental health and the organisation providing, support for that.
Yeah. It's equal parts, I would say. It's a relationship rather than, a transaction. People are in control of their life outside of work. There are things in life that we won't be able to control. There's relationship breakdowns or bereavement, these sorts of things. They are tough, and obviously workplaces will have policies in place to protect that. But I think there is that individual responsibility in terms of how you present yourself to the workplace, how you take care of yourself, and that very much is a personal thing. It is on you to do that, to turn up as your best self. But I think there is always been a focus on that to a point from the workplace. I guess my view on this is not that, workplaces need to make sure that people are happy 24/7. They need to provide them with everything. But I think what they should be doing is doing their best so that their environment is giving that person the best chance to succeed and to be happy in the time that they spend within the walls of that organization. And the rest then, to that point, is up to the individual to be taking care of themselves. So I think it's an equal responsibility, but just from different avenues. Yeah.
I see, Matt, we've got Dorothy's got her hand up, so I'll let her come in here.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question and really helpful response, Matt. If we come at it from a different direction, if we come at it, which isn't your direction, so at it from the kind of the risk to the employer side.
Yeah.
And there is that bit. If an employer, and the employer, we say manager, the person who knows their team, knows that there's something wrong, words I'm using just to get through this, there's something wrong and have not done anything about it, and then everything goes chaotic in some way, then there is a big responsibility on the employer who hasn't done anything. And we have seen, and we see in investigations or grievances, etc., where individuals will say, I've told my manager many times that I'm not happy. I've told them that I have issues, and they've done blank, blank about it. So, there is that real challenge of employers, managers. You can't ignore it. You can't, anything in your team, you're looking in and you're thinking, that person's different to how they were a few months ago. There's something happening there, and I don't know what it is, but you know what? They'll tell me if I need to know, which is the opposite of what we need to do. We need to be asking more questions, and you've both said, be more curious. How are you? If you don't present yourself as a manager who cares about your staff, if you don't ask those questions routinely, how are you? How's things? Then if they have something to share and you don't do that, they'll not share it with you. So we have to be, as managers, HR, all that stuff, which I know you've said, is be curious, ask more questions, and get in there and help with things earlier. And we get managers who talk to us about, but I won't know what to do, and it's that bit of, I'll just not ask because I'll not know what to do about it if they tell me that they've got a big issue. So there's that, reduce this talking about it, reducing the stigma. It's interesting because we did some work on domestic abuse, which there is a connection, isn't there?
Mm.
And the big bit is about we were calling it the three R's, R's if you're talking with a different accent. The three R's, where it's recognize that there's an issue, respond, and refer. And by that, recognize that this person's different to they were 6 months ago. Then do something about it. Have that conversation, which might be, come on, you and I need a wee chat here. I've noticed, blah, blah. So you're coming in easy, whatever. And if they don't want to tell you, they won't. If they do want to tell you, then you're not the one that has to solve it. You have to know who will help that person. So you're giving that person options as to how they can get support. And that's your responsibility as a manager, besides all of the culture stuff that you've talked wonderfully about all the way through.
Thank you. If you don't mind me just reflecting on that very quickly, really amazing point. And I wanted to sort of reflect on mental health first aid. There's a part of mental health first aid where, you're talking about suicide, and that there's a very real fear that when you ask people, are you thinking about suicide, that they might say yes.
Yeah.
What happens at that point? And I think if we pull that back to the workplace, sometimes we can feel, the burden and the stress of, what happens if they do say yes. But I think the way you put it had me thinking about a situation a little while back, and it was just curiosity, as you put it. My manager Johnny, who's in this chat, like probably 2 or 3 months back, he asked me if I was okay, and I was having a bit down week, and I was like, yeah, I'm fine. He's like, I've just noticed you're apologizing more for things. Like I would start things in the Teams chat being like, oh, sorry, I didn't realize, or sorry, and he's like, I've just noticed this, and like I wanted to check in. Are you okay? And it was literally just noticing how I communicated, and that I was adding one singular word or sort of opening sentences with that phrase, that it made him curious about whether I was doing okay. That was a very minor thing. There was a couple of things in my social life that were happening. It wasn't, impacting work, but obviously it was impacting my sort of, I guess, how I was presenting myself, and it was easily solved. But just having that curiosity and that care, really made a difference. And I will never, sorry, just responding in the chat, I will never apologize for the ashes. Sorry, Johnny.
You have made the point perfectly, Matt. You have absolutely made that point perfectly. A manager who cares, who notices, and gives you the opportunity to speak. Yeah, perfectly.
Thank you so much for that.
Thanks for being so open again, Matt. And we have gone over, I see we're losing some people, but actually getting some fantastic comments. So, that if you feel you need to go, then thanks for coming along, and we'll just wrap up the session to say a massive thank you to both you, Matt, as our speaker, but also to Johnny, who's been working in the chat with Louise. You sound like a fantastic manager, Johnny. So yeah, we will close the webinar off just now, and we just want to thank everyone for being able to come and join us today.